points of contention?
When will we get our grade for SA1?
Oh yeah, SA1. So I'm still finishing up SA1. I should have everything wrapped up by Friday. So on that note, really fast. So remember Friday we have class, right? Friday's operating on a Monday schedule. So there'll be class, same time, place here. If you can't make it on Friday, again, make sure you get caught up with the work. Right, Jordan?
No, I was looking at the dates. Thursday was last week.
Yes. But it never completely goes away. All right. All right, so class on Friday, right? Then Monday, we have the midterm. Review sheet for the midterm is posted on Brightspace, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at it. Okay. Are there any questions about the midterm or about the review sheet or anything like that, Mark?
So we can bring our notes, can we have notes like
No notes. No, yeah, so no nothing. So you can use the review sheet to prepare, but then the midterm is just you, a pen or pencil.
So it's in person,
In person here, yes.
Professor, so for the first section, I know we have to answer two questions. If we answer both of them, can you see which one's better and give us a grade based on that? I mean, is that possible?
Yeah,
Whether you can just answer the question that you can answer.
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm gonna go with you gotta pick one, or you can write them both out, but then you gotta pick which one you like better for me to grade. Okay, yeah, no, I think that's what we do. So there's four questions that appear on the review sheet, right? Two of those will appear on the exam. You don't know which two, right? But 2 out of those 4, and then you'll pick one of the 2 to answer. Okay? Studying for all 4 of them or preparing all 4 of them, even if they don't appear on the exam, will help prepare you for other sections of the exam, if that makes sense. Are other questions? Okay, so again, I'm available if people want help reviewing for the midterm. So like I said, we've got class on Friday, I've got office hours, I'm happy to set up a Zoom appointment. So if you want any help or advice getting ready for the midterm, again, just let me know and I'm happy to set something up. Okay, other questions? Good, all right. Well, before we get to the Peloponnesian War, I have to finish up a little bit because we've got kind of behind. Go back here to my Athenian culture from last Wednesday. Okay, so we left off here, right, talking about family and household. One of the things that sets ancient Greece apart from earlier ancient cultures, right? So all of the cultures that we were talking about at the beginning of the semester, right, is that the ancient Greeks developed strict monogamy. Okay? By strict monogamy, we mean person is only able to have one spouse at a time, and that there are no exceptions to this. Not even for like kings or, anyone else, right? And this is very unusual in the ancient world. The default is polygamy. Doesn't mean that everyone has multiple spouses, but it's still, that it's possible within a community. Ancient Greece, strict monogamy. No one's quite sure why it develops either. It's kind of one of the mysteries that we still haven't fully figured out, right? Now, just because there's strict monogamy, only one spouse at a time, right? It does not mean that an individual, and to be honest, that the man cannot have extramarital partners. So monogamy doesn't mean one partner, it means one spouse, one wife.
So legally he can marry twice and have 2 spouses?
No.
No?
Legally, he can only marry once, one spouse. So if I'm an Athenian man, I'm allowed one wife. I'm allowed as many girlfriends as I can get away with, or as I want.
But no more than one wife?
No more than one wife.
Okay.
Now, what separates the wife from the girlfriend? Again, legal status. And really, the ability to produce Athenian citizen children. So when they talk about monogamy and everything, it's not about, one man, one woman, together forever, right? It's only one wife. The man, again, there's lots of options for extramarital, whatever. Mark?
So what if you have a child with the partner, the girlfriend?
Say that one more time. Oh, what if? If I have a child with someone who's not my wife.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, not an Athenian citizen. One of the most famous examples is Pericles, who we were talking about, right? He has a longtime partner, companion by the name of Aspasia, has a child with him, right? So the child is Pericles Jr., is not an Athenian citizen. So at first he has medic status, and then eventually down the road, when other things happen, one of those rare cases where the Athenian Assembly naturalizes someone and gives them Athenian citizenship, they're going to give citizenship to Pericles Jr. Right, Timo?
That's funny because it's kind of like what Trump is saying right now
About what?
about citizenship and getting citizenship just because you're born in the US is no longer
Right.
enough. So you need to have parents who, at least one of them is
Right.
a US citizen.
So this is the default in the ancient world, right? The idea of citizenship coming from where you are born doesn't really exist at this point, right? If places take citizenship seriously, which not all places do, it's grounded in lines of descent, right? So citizenship of the father, sometimes, in the case of Athens, right, citizenship, both father and mother have to be Athenians.
Was there like a form of like adoption during these times?
Absolutely.
So if I adopted a child outside of ancient Greece, like as a baby, and into my family, is he considered?
No.
He's still, even though he's part of my.
Even though he's part of my family, yes.
Yeah.
Again, by default.
By default.
And would be strongly discouraged to adopt a non-Athenian. If you're going to adopt someone, it's again about continuing your lineage. And so adopting someone who is a non-Athenian would not be a way to do that. And so most adoption is going to be people adopting adults, and it's going to be adopting, it's like, why adopt it, right? It's like, I have no children, I want my family line to go on, someone's gotta take over my property, I'm going to adopt this 40-year-old guy here as my son, he then takes my name, he becomes my legal son, there we go. Romans are gonna do this even more than the Athenians. There's less concern, very little concern, say about taking care of children without parents. That is not really factoring into the calculus in a way that when we think of modern adoption, that becomes a much bigger part.
If I recall correctly, doesn't doesn't your inheritance go to your biological children, or can it also be applied to the children that you had with the extramarital partners?
You've got some leeway, generally speaking, biological. Again, this becomes more developed in Rome. Athens doesn't quite get as sophisticated with this. Basically, you get some leeway if you write a will, but you're supposed to kind of preference your bloodline. Or your adopted child, which is part of your bloodline. If that makes sense, right? Because even though they're not of your blood, they're still carrying on your name. You can leave money elsewhere, but you're supposed to be very limited. It's a family money more than almost your money. Okay. Expectation for both men and women in Athens is that they're going to get married and that they're going to have children. So this is kind of the default, no matter who you are, right? This is pretty much on your horizon. As we saw with Pericles' funeral oration, right, when he talks about the women, like, I know you're sad right now, but still go and have more babies, right? It's about continuing the polis, right, the city-state, but also the oikos, the household. Talked about this with the ancient Near East, right? I'm not going to talk about it very much now because I'm already kind of behind, but, right, there's a gendered labor system in Athens. It's pretty much in line with the ancient Near East. Men, outdoor tasks, women, indoor tasks. We'll turn to that in a second. Okay, education, right? In Athens, known as paideia, right? So there wasn't a public education system in the way that we would imagine it, right? It essentially comes, for the most part, right, from what we might think of as being private tutors or maybe private schools, right? Education was very much a liberal arts education, which the Greeks called philosophy, right? So philosophy was more than what we call philosophy today, but it would encompass things like literature, kind of oral communication or rhetoric, mathematics, so on, right? Wealthy girls, we think, also may have been educated, probably were educated to a lesser extent, because partly, as we see, at the very least, the ability to read or write was seen as a valuable skill for a wife, but we really don't have much evidence. The sources really don't talk about it very much, so it's hard to tell exactly what was going on, okay? So another kind of commonly known, I guess, aspect of ancient Athens, right, that existed within the context of education is pederasty, right? So what pederasty means, and so the modern word is taken from the ancient Greek word, the word that's used by the Athenians, right, is that within education, in addition to kind of this liberal arts education, right, teenage citizen boys and post-pubescent citizen boys would have a mentoring relationship with an adult male who was outside of the family, right? So a citizen man would kind of adopt a mentoring role for a teenage boy from another family, right? And this was part of becoming an Athenian citizen, right? Now, an important, so not the only part, but an important part of this mentoring relationship was some sort of kind of erotic or sexual element as well, which is where kind of the modern use of the word pederasty comes from, right? So this was seen as not just normal, but was seen as, I guess, desirable by Athenian society, especially Athenian elite society. Questions here? So there's a lot more to be said about this, but we don't have so much time. But are there any questions? One.
Wait, so the mentor had a sexual relationship with the mentee, is that?
They could. And there may have been some guidelines to this. Scholars are still a little bit debated. But it was definitely, we would say definitely an erotic, there was an erotic element to it, right? That this was described as not just a intellectual relationship, that this was an erotic relationship in a way. But what this how this actually manifested is varied.
Why didn't your fathers took the role of mentorship? Why someone outside the family?
So the theory is, right, that this is something that kind of gets added on later, right? So it's less about fathers, because obviously this becomes even more problematic with fathers, right? The idea is having a mentor from outside of the family basically broadens your network. It builds alliances, and so if you are, kind of an elite person that is going into politics, having these connections is going to be important. So we don't know for sure because we don't have the evidence, but again, it seems that having mentors coming from outside of the family builds these connections, and that this gets kind of folded into it along the way.
So in a way, this is sort of like, I know in medieval times there's like the concept of fostering, where like, if you're from a noble house, you could send your son to a friend of your noble house in order to make relationships with them and strengthen the bond.
Yeah, okay, so it's maybe a similar idea, but very different execution. So you're not sending someone to live with someone else, right? They're still at home, and in the medieval, there's not supposed to be this at all.
Yeah.
Right. But a similar type of idea, right, of kind of building these elite connections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's how they were bonding, I guess.
I mean, it is what it is, right? Like this was age differential at all was a key part of Athenian elite education and Athenian elite political culture.
But wasn't that why they killed Socrates? Because of this?
Not because of this.
Okay.
No. So it was more, the stated reason was it wasn't this, it was what he was teaching.
Oh.
the use, and that he was basically being anti-democratic. We'll talk more about that next week, or no, Friday. We'll talk more about that Friday. Okay, other questions? Okay, so again, there's a lot more to say. I can definitely say a lot more about it, so if you're curious or you want to know more, but that's kind of what we need to know for the class, right? Okay, so I really don't have time to talk about this text. Again, see notes about being behind. This was assigned for last week, but I do want to say a few words about this, right? So this is the oikonomikos, right? You see the word oikos, which means household, right? And nomos is the Greek word for law, or rules, right? And so this is kind of like the household rules. And this was a philosophical treatise, so not a practical work, not like instructions, but a philosophical kind of exploration of the ideal Athenian household. Anyone guess what English word comes from oikonomikos? Economics. It's where the word economics comes from, actually, right? And so here, this is written by Xenophon, who was, again, an Athenian politician, general, philosopher. And as the story goes, right, he was a student of Socrates. In this reading, right, he writes about Socrates encountering an Athenian by the name of Ischomachus. And according to Socrates, right, again, who's a character in this treatise, Ischomachus runs the ideal Athenian household. And so Socrates is going to basically converse with Ischomachus about what he does to kind of learn about, well, what makes a great Athenian household, right? And so that's kind of the framework for this treatise, right? And so Socrates starts off at the beginning. I'm going to take you through some key points, right? Socrates is like, Ischomachus, right? Like, you're always out in public. You're always doing things, right? How do, you get so much time to deal with public affairs and public matters? How can you get away from your home so often? And Ischomachus says, right, again, this is kind of the ideal, is that I've trained my wife to manage the home. So she manages the home effectively, which frees up more time for me to be engaged in public affairs. Okay? And you remember the funeral oration, right? What's one of the defining characteristics of an Athenian? Like a good Athenian is someone who's involved in politics, someone who is contributing to the kind of collective action. So Ischomachus kind of represents kind of this ideal Athenian, right? That he's able to give so much because he has, again, literally trained his wife to manage his home effectively. Okay? Everyone with me there? Okay. The wife of Ischomachus, according to the treatise, was not yet 15 when she married the adult Ischomachus, right? So there's usually at least a 10-year age difference from the evidence that we see between Athenian men and women. Hence where the training comes in, because Socrates is like, Ischomachus, what did your wife know when you married her? And he was like, basically nothing. She just left her father's house. She knew some stuff about, kind of woolworking, right, about how to weave, right? But really, I needed to teach her everything. Okay, so again, expressed as an ideal, right? And what he teaches her are basically things like overseeing the inside of the house. That the outside of the house is still a masculine purview, right? The agricultural work and stuff, that's still kind of male work. Interior of the house, women's work. But by effectively managing the interior of the house, right? Which includes like the receipt of goods and storage and things like that. You make the whole household work more effectively, frees up more time for public life. Okay, really quick.
Read this to you here.
So this is, if you happen to have it, you can pull it up. If not, I'm just going to go really quick. Page 5, paragraph 21. Ischomachus says, he's teaching his wife, it is important then, when the provisions are brought into the home, for someone to keep them safe and to do the work of the household. A home is required for the rearing of infant children, and a home is required for making food at the harvest. Similarly, a home is required for the making of clothing from wool. 22. Since both indoor and outdoor matters require work and supervision, I said, I believe that the God arranged the work and supervision indoors as a woman's task, and the outdoors are the man's. He goes on. For the God made a man's body and soul better able to endure the cold and the heat of travel and military service, so that he assigned to him the outdoor work. But the God endowed the woman with a body less able to endure these hardships, and so, as Skolnikos told me, he said, I believe that he assigned the indoor work to her. With this in mind, the God made the nursing of young children instinctive for women and gave her this task, and he allotted more affection for infants to her than to the man. Okay, so what's he saying in this paragraph? What's the takeaway? Nicolette?
That women belong like in the home and men belong on the field.
Outside, right. And why? This is the important part. Why?
It's religiously manufactured.
Sort of. I mean, he's using religion here, but this is Socrates, and kind of religion means everything that's kind of superhuman. So where is it coming from?
From a biological standpoint, like because men are bigger, stronger.
Not biological, although it's going to be related, because that's coming from, and he doesn't couch it necessarily so much in terms of strength, right? He talks about endurance and stuff like that, but it's coming from the God. But when he says God, really what he's kind of talking about is like
I would say mortality though, not gods, because like he refers to them as like gods, but right, they worship Athena, who is the goddess of war, but he's then telling us that we're not strong enough to partake in war.
Oh, well, okay, that's a whole other issue. Yeah. That is complicated. I can talk more about that, but that requires a long conversation. No, but here he's talking about the God. This is Socrates talking about the God. Socrates has weird religious views. When he's talking about the God, he's kind of talking, I would plow ahead, he's talking about nature. So he's like, by nature, men and women are different. And this is a fundamental belief, like to understand the ancient world and kind of ancient society, you have to understand this assumption, right? That they fundamentally believe that men and women were different, not just in their bodies, and this is why I moved away from physical, but in their, whatever's the inside, soul, nature, essence, that men and women were fundamentally different, right? And this is a belief not just in ancient Athens, but throughout the pre-modern world, right? So he goes on. The God designated, so nature, whatever, right, designated that a woman should guard what is brought into the household, because he knew that a fearful soul is better at guarding. He also gave a greater share of fearfulness to the woman than to the man, because he knew that it would be necessary for the one who did the outdoor work to defend the household if someone tried to hurt it. He allotted to him a greater share of the courage, right? And then he goes on to talk about more divisions again, right? So, the God, nature, the supreme force, created men and women different so that they could perform different tasks, different lives, right? So a fundamental assumption. Okay? Are there questions here? Okay. So, not saying it's an accurate statement in any way whatsoever, right? But just that this is a core belief among most ancient peoples. Okay? All right. All right, I think I'm going to move on here. Any other thoughts about social roles? Or questions? Okay, all right, we're moving along then. Okay, so we're moving on to a watershed moment, ancient Greek history, the Peloponnesian War. So if you remember last week, before we started talking about society, we were talking about mounting tensions between Athens and Sparta. Sparta had been the traditional kind of big dog, but Athenian power ever since the Persian Wars had been growing, right? This kind of tension breaks out into some fighting, a hot war that we don't know very much about, that we call the First Peloponnesian War. Again, we talked about that all last week. 445 BCE, Athens and Sparta signed what's called the 30 Years' Peace, where there's going to be 30 years of peace between these two city-states. Apart from this, Athens had lost its burgeoning land empire. So Athens had had a maritime empire. It used this kind of conflict with Sparta to kind of conquer more land for itself, but lost it all with this. So Athens then moves into another area, right? After the 30 Years' peace, in order to maintain it, it starts increasing its influences in more kind of far-flung regions. So Thrace, which is up here, right, especially on the coast, Black Sea region, and the west in Italy, right? So Athens is trying to basically extend its influence there in order to take advantage of the resources and economic opportunities. What's Sparta doing? We don't know. In the mid-30s, there's 3 events that are going to provoke a crisis. One, there's going to be a civil war on Corcyra between a democratic and oligarchic faction. Athens and Sparta are going to kind of get involved with their relative factions. Next, right, Potidaea, which is up here, was a colony founded by Corinth, here. Corinth was an ally of Sparta and a member of the Peloponnesian League. Potidaea was a member of the Delian League and an ally of Sparta, ally of Athens. The Athenians basically forced Potidaea to expel all Corinthians from the colony and say Corinth can't have any more kind of input into the colony. Even though Potidaea is an independent city, all colonies were, this was a big deal because colonies were supposed to maintain kind of a close working relationship with their metropolis, with their mother city. So the fact that Athens basically pushes Corinth away from the colony, big deal, right? And Corinth, ally of Sparta. Last thing, right? Athens passes something called the Megaran Decrees. So Megara was a city that was right next to Corinth, right? The first Peloponnesian War was kicked off by basically Athens forming an alliance with Megara, which had traditionally been under the Peloponnesian sphere of influence. Now things have shifted. Megara has gone back to the Peloponnesian side. Athens passes these decrees saying merchants from Megara can no longer visit Athens or trade in any allied ports, which is a lot of ports, right? Because all of the Delian League are Athenian allies. So again, civil war, Athens and Sparta are on opposite sides, exclude an important Spartan ally from their colony, and again, deny another Spartan ally trade access, right? 3 locations kind of scattered all around Greece, right? So Megara, Corcyra, Potidaea. Okay, so Corinth is like, forget this. Corinth is like, after the Megaran Decrees, it's like, Sparta, time to declare war, let's go fight Athens. Oddly enough, Sparta is a little bit more cautious. So one of the Spartan kings at the time, a guy by the name of Archidamus, reaches out to Athens and says, okay, look, we want to avoid war. 3 things you need to do to avoid a war with Sparta. Number 1, rescind the Megaran Decrees. Okay. Number 2, you must free all the Greeks. Okay, well, what does that mean? What it probably means is allowing any of those who wish to leave the Delian League. So who remembers from last week? What had Athens been doing when city-states had wanted to leave the Delian League? Abdul? And what?
So you can't.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Basically, so you can't leave.
Yeah, how did they back that up?
They're military.
Their military, their navy, right? They'd sail their navy over, say, no, you can't leave.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then seize all of their kind of ships and other assets, right? And of course, this is a big deal. To avoid war, they must expel the cursed Alcmaeonids from the city of Athens. Who remembers the cursed Alcmaeonids? Who remembers? Jordan?
Was that family of Athenians that one of them got kicked out, and that was like starting reforms of democracy or something.
Yeah, that was part of it. And remember, it starts back with the Pylon attempting to become tyrant, right? And there's that kind of agreement of, okay, we'll let you, if you surrender, we'll let you leave, right? But the magistrate breaks his vow and kills Kylon as soon as he leaves the temple. He's Megacles from the Alcmaeonid family. From that point, the Alcmaeonid family is supposedly cursed, right? And this keeps raising its head when expedient, right? Why do the Spartans care about the curse in the Alcmaeonids? They don't really. But who's an Alcmaeonid? Right? The most important of the Athenian politicians, arguably their best general at the time, Pericles. So the Spartans want Pericles out. All right? Athens is like, at which point Thebes, right, which is another, on the Spartan side, attacks nearby Plataea, another city-state that's an Athenian ally, and you get full-blown war, right? So Sparta kind of gets almost dragged into this war semi-reluctantly, I would say. The first part of the war is called, we call it the Archidamian War after King Archidamus, right? And the reason for this is that it has a very kind of weird flow. Pericles is basically says, look, Sparta has a much bigger, much better army than us, land army. If we fight Sparta, hoplite to hoplite, army to army, we're going to lose. No way about it. So what we're going to do is that we're going to avoid hoplite battle. King Archidamus wants to come and fight us. We're just going to avoid that. Instead, we are going to turn Athens into an island. How do you turn Athens into an island, you may ask? Answer, walls. So the Athenians, if you remember, there was this whole big thing about Sparta wanting Athens to like not rebuild its walls and not refortify, and Athens kept saying no, and this was a point of tension. This is where the Athenians end up with, right? What are called the long walls. So here's the city center of Athens. So all of this is Attica. Here's the city center of Athens, right? So kind of the smack dab where all the important stuff happens. Here is the port of Piraeus. So part of Athens, the city-state, right? This is kind of their main harbor, their main port, where all their stuff comes in. Here, two long walls that are basically protecting this strip of land between Piraeus and Athens. So, does anyone want to guess what Pericles means when he says turn Athens into an island? What's that? Supply themselves where?
From the port.
From the port. Okay. How does that make Athens an island instead of a port city?
They don't need to venture outside the walls.
Okay. Don't need to venture outside the walls.
I think that they wouldn't have to worry about the different armies as much.
Right.
Have to worry about navies, but not armies.
But who's got the best navy by far?
Athens.
Athens, right? So that's it, right? Don't venture outside the walls, and in fact, really just don't care about anything that happens outside the walls. So King Archidamus is going to be kind of, because there's all sorts of like farms and villages and people living there. King Archidamus is going to be ramping all throughout this area, burning things. Lots of refugees are going to be coming to the city center, right? But the strategy is island, right? It's this, and the corridor that's in between it, using the Athenian navy to resupply. And, right, harass the Peloponnesus with the navy too, right? They don't have a strong navy. If we can harass their ports and shipping, maybe we can do damage there. Or they also do things like kind of hit and run things where they will go drop off a bunch of soldiers. Athenian soldiers will run around burning things, get back on ships before the Spartans can respond. And this seems to be working really well at first, right? But then disaster strikes. 429, a plague strikes Athens, right? Attica is an island. The people whose farms are getting burned need a place to go, right? They move into Athens, gets really overcrowded. This exacerbates a big kind of outbreak that kind of explodes, right? And Pericles is going to be one of many casualties. Pericles is out of the way. which is going to lead to a change in Athenian politics and war strategy. After Pericles dies, we get the rise of the demagogue. So demagogue just means leader of the people. It is, in theory, a neutral term. But it gets used to mean people that try to kind of manipulate the people for their own purposes, their own goals, their own oftentimes nefarious purposes, right? So it starts to have kind of a negative connotation. Not just people who lead the people, but who lead the people in the wrong direction for their own gain. After the death of Pericles, the most influential of these demagogues and politicians is someone by the name of Cleon. Cleon is very pro-war. None of this kind of messing around island stuff, right? Cleon says we need to go full out against Sparta, wipe them off the face of the earth. And, surprisingly, seems to have a little bit of success actually doing this too, against all odds. That Athens starts winning some important victories, not just on sea, but in land, against Sparta. All right, which brings us to our first reading today. From Thucydides, an important event during the ascendancy of Cleon, we get the Mytilenean debate. This is PS 13. Okay. Who or what is Mytilene? Who or what is Mytilene? Abdul. Part of the Delian League, which means what's its relationship to Athens? It's an ally of Athens, or subject of Athens, depending on how you look at it, right? Right, they want to leave again. And again, they're located over on the island of Lesbos, here, right? So, part of the Delian League, Mytilene is a city-state on Lesbos. Lesbos is a big island. There's actually 5 city-states on it. They want to leave. Why do they want to leave? Who is making overtures to the Mytileneans? Who's trying to persuade the Mytileneans to leave? Spartans. And the Spartans say, hey, time to reject Athens. We'll back you up. And the Spartans do seem to want to back them up. Mytilene and the other Lesbian city-states are important allies to Athens because they are one of the few city-states that are still allowed to kind of contribute their own ships. And so they're a kind of big naval force in their own right. Long story short, before the Spartan force can get there, the Athenian navy shows up, right, and retakes the island. Spartans are forced to flee. Mytilene is back under Athenian control. So now, the big question: what is to be done with the Mytileneans, the inhabitants of this city-state? The Athenian assembly votes. All the men are to be executed. All the women and children are to be enslaved. A serious punishment. The Athenians say, well, rebelling against Athens is a serious crime. Next day, though, soon after, the Athenians start to have a change of heart. They're like, maybe this is a little too strong, right? Killing all the men? Like, sure, there's the ringleaders, we can kill them. Should we kill all of them? Maybe we should rethink this before acting. And this is the Mytilenean debate. All right, we've made this decision to kill and enslave all of the citizens of Mytilene. What do we do? All right, so what are the two sides of the debate? Nicolette.
One would be not to kill them, and one would be to kill them.
Who's in favor of killing them?
Say the elites are in favor of them.
Okay. And who is the leading voice, do you think? Cleon. Cleon is saying, look, We voted to kill them, we need to kill them, time to kill them and enslave them. Right? He's got an opponent who says, no, we shouldn't kill them. Exodus. We should change our mind, it's too harsh. What is the main issue that is driving the debate? And whether or not to kill and enslave all of the Middle-Eanians? Go on.
That the people that were armed, they didn't actually fight
Mhm.
the Athenians came.
Right? There were a lot of people that didn't fight the Athenians, right? But and so the question is, should they be killed? What is motivating that decision, though? Why are they wavering about should these people be killed? Nicolette?
It's considered genocide of all.
Nope. That's not the issue. That's what we hope would be the issue. It's what I hope would be the issue. That is not the issue, at least as appears to Thucydides. The way that it is presented, maybe someone thinks that, but the way that it's presented isn't really about the people themselves. What is the issue? At least in what gets recorded here.
Other allies of the rebellion see this as a possible threat to them.
Yes. And so what's at stake with this decision? Whether to kill or not kill.
Potential future allies.
Right. What's going to happen to the other allies? Right. So it is presented as a political decision. Now again, if we're optimistic and altruistic, maybe we say, well, they're presenting it as a political arrangement in a way to kind of convince people, but really they care about the Middle-Eanians. We don't know. We don't know what people were actually thinking during this debate, right? But the way that it's presented, we're talking about political expediency, about what's going to happen to the empire. So, according to Cleon, why is killing and enslaving the Middle-Eanians, all of them, good for the Athenian Empire? Why is it good?
It just shows all the subjects that like rebelling against Athens is not so.
There you go, right? If you rebel against Athens, this is what's going to happen to you. All right. He's like, send a message. And what is worse, Cleon says, than deciding to do this and then changing your mind right after? Why is that bad, according to Cleon, do you think? If you didn't read it, you can guess it, right? Why is it Cosmo?
It shows hesitance.
Hesitance,
Questioning.
questioning, weakness, right? There you go. That doesn't project strength. We decide to kill him. Killing him's the best thing to do. We need to kill him anyway. Okay. So the other side, right? All right, so we've got here Didotus. What's his argument for not killing them? Why is this good for the Athenian Empire? Abdul. Sorry, loud.
Say it would like mess up their empire, like their future endeavor.
Why not?
Because if you do kill a whole, like let's say you commit genocide or something, your further like allies or something with your pocket would hesitate to like join you out of fear this might happen to them also.
Maybe. But the allies are already our allies, right? They're already there.
Future, like let's say you try to like expand more.
Yeah, but they don't have a choice, right? Remember, we're using allies in quotes here, where the Athenian Navy shows up and says, you're now our allies, right? So there might be something there, but it's not quite, right? It's more concerned about what might happen to current allies. What's that? They might rebel, but then isn't Cleon right? Then, if we have such a harsh penalty, then if they rebel, that'll be a deterrent to them to rebel. What happens if someone, they're like, Dionysus is like, well, you can't kind of control everything. You're going to get factions. You're going to get people that are doing or saying things, and that sometimes become problematic. And if we set such a drastic example with the Middle-Eanians, what's going to happen in these future cases?
They rebel worse.
Right. Why are they going to rebel worse?
Because they know what we can bring now. Where they put down their arms and didn't fight back, our allies might fight back harder.
Right. That they know, like, look, all of these other people that actually didn't fight against Athens, right, that they got, kind of caught up in all of this other stuff, right, they all got executed. Now we've got some other stuff going on here. I'm not involved, but I better get involved because otherwise I'm going to be killed even though I didn't do anything. So Diodotus says, look, if you want things to be able to calm down, if you want people to be able to surrender, if you want people to be able to handle their own business, it needs to be a more measured response, right? But again, the whole argument, at least as presented here, about killing and enslaving, right? It's not about morality. It's about how best to manage the empire, right? Is the way that the speech is, again, pitched. Diodotus' view wins out. The Athenians reverse course. They say, okay, we're only going to kind of kill the ringleaders, right? Mytilene is brought back into the Delian League. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Mytilene debate? Athenian ethics aren't necessarily our ethics, right? One of the sobering things to kind of encounter. All right, Cleon is going to die in battle, 422 BCE, right? This is going to open up the door for peace. Cleon was very, very rabidly pro-war, like war, and he also had a Spartan kind of counterpart by the name of Brasidas, who was also very like war, fight. So Cleon dies, Brasidas dies, this opens up kind of an avenue to peace. Sparta and Athens sign the Peace of Nicias, which is named after one of the Athenian negotiators, promising now 50 years of peace, right, between Athens and Sparta. Moreover, Athens doesn't have to make any concessions. Its empire and its navy can remain intact. So for all intents and purposes, Athens has won, or at least has been able to maintain the status quo. Okay, questions? Nicolette?
When you promise a 50-year peace, when you don't hold for 50 years.
We're saying our city-states aren't going to fight each other for 50 years.
But the next generation might have different.
Well, and in fact, you can see how long the 30 years peace left,
Yeah.
I think everyone kind of knew the realities of it, but it's supposed to be part of this. All right, part of this speaks to the idea that warfare was accepted in a way that we might say, ideally we want no war, and modern people might say, ideally we might want no war. That's the goal. They wouldn't quite phrase it that way in antiquity, right? They would phrase it like, look, we're going to be fighting, and that's not a bad thing. We're just not going to fight each other for 50 years. So that's part of the reason why it gets expressed that way, right? Is this recognition that perpetual peace is not something that's necessarily desired. Okay, but that being said, I don't think anyone believes it's going to last for 50 years. And in fact, barely makes it 6. 415, ambassadors from a city-state in Sicily called Segesta show up. They appeal to the Athenian assembly saying, look, we could use your help. We really love Athens. There's a lot of other people on Athens. a lot of other people in Sicily that love Athens, right? More of us want to be part of your Delian League. We want to be friends and allies of Athens. There's other people on Sicily, other city-states that don't want this. Can you send your navy over to Sicily to help take care of the other guys, and then we'll all join the Delian League? Okay. Athens jumps, doesn't quite jump, but many Athenians see this as a prime opportunity, right? So Sicily is a rich island. Athens has a little bit of a kind of, interaction with it, right? But really, oh my God, this is a great opportunity to, bring all of these rich city-states, this rich island, into the Delian League, which is really the Athenian Empire, right? So there's a big debate in the Athenian assembly. Should Athens sail to Sicily, help Segesta, basically expand the empire? On one side, you have Nicias, right? That main kind of negotiator who had founded the peace a few years earlier. On the other side, a rising, up-and-coming politician, right? A student, and in fact, mentee of Socrates, right? Going back to the pederasty discussion, Alcibiades, right? Big debate, should we do this or not? Nicias is like, wait, we've got peace, we've got an empire, Sicily is really far away, right? Most people here don't even know where Sicily is. Like, it's not worth it, it's gonna end in disaster. Alcibiades is like, we can do it, we're gonna be rich, everyone's gonna profit. Alcibiades wins, right? They decide to send an expedition to Sicily. Everyone's gonna get rich. The night before the expedition is supposed to sail, something happens. There are reports that young men of Athens are profaning the religious rites. What that means is they're getting drunk and they're basically kind of having kind of fake religious rituals to have fun and party. Plus, they go throughout the city wrecking sacred statues known as Herms. So the Herms statues were all over Athens, important religious and civic importance. As part of these kind of drunken revels, they destroyed the statues. This is seen as a bad omen. The night before the Sicilian expedition is supposed to leave. And reports come. Who is the one who is supposedly leading this? Alcibiades, the very person who had argued for the expedition, and in fact, along with Nicias, appointed as one of the co-leaders. But, too late to do anything about that, the expedition set sail. Soon after, the Athenian people start thinking, hey wait, this is a big problem. We need to get Alcibiades back here. He needs to stand trial. He needs to answer for his actions. We need to clear things up with the gods. So they send a boat following the fleet to Sicily, basically saying, okay, Alcibiades, you need to return and stand trial. Alcibiades does not return to Athens. He flees Sicily, heads over to Sparta, and starts working with the Spartans against the Athenians. Not the last we're going to see of him. Sicily is a disaster for the Athenians, right? It is the worst disaster that you can possibly imagine. Massive loss of life, massive loss of ships, massive loss of money, right? It is going to wreck Athens. I forgot its map, right? Athens, Sicily. It's going to wreck Athens, and in a way, it's going to damage the Athenian democracy. So after this, basically the war picks up again, right? Sparta's like, well, Athens started it, / Athens is weak now, right? So the fighting picks up. For the next 10 years or so, goes back and forth. Sparta, Athens, Sparta, Athens. Both seem on the verge of winning at various times, right? Sparta seems about to win, then Athens seems about to win. Sparta seems about to win, Athens about to win. All of a sudden, a new player comes into town. Persia. Remember, the Greeks had turned back the Persian invasion, but Persia was still there, right? Richest, most powerful state in the world still at the time. Persia starts funneling money to Sparta so that they can basically build a navy to fight against Athens. Persia sees that it's in its best interests for the Athenian Empire to be dismantled. At which point, Alcibiades reaches out to Athens. He says, I can fix this. Let me come back. Never mind that he's been working with Sparta for the last few years. Let me come back. I can get Persia to support us and turn from Spartans. Athenian says, okay. Then doesn't work out. Alcibiades disappears again. Athens starts to descend into civil strife, like fighting on the streets, right? There is a crisis of democracy. Many people in Athens see democracy has failed, right? That it is leading Athens astray. Example number one, Sicilian expedition, right? Athens had won the war, it had an empire, and it threw it away. Why did it throw it away? Because a bunch of people who didn't know better voted for the Sicilian expedition. Many start saying, look, democracy doesn't work. It is a flawed system where uninformed people get to make the decisions. This is why we're losing against Sparta. We need to get rid of it. These voices get louder and louder and louder until 411, there's a coup, right? So the democracy is overthrown and replaced by these voices, basically replace it with an oligarchy, a smaller ruling council. They are now going to govern Athens. They recall all those who have been exiled, again, including our friend Alcibiades there, but this isn't going to last long, right? There's going to be kind of a counter coup that happens the next year, and democracy is going to be restored. But again, lots of kind of anti-democratic voices made themselves heard during this period. All right, questions here? So, even though democracy's been restored, Alcibiades was allowed to stay, right? He had been recalled. He takes command of the Athenian forces, or doesn't take command. First, he's like kind of a general for the Athenian forces. He wins a bunch of really impressive battles. So he's given kind of full command over the Athenian navy. So Alcibiades is now leading the war effort, at which point he then promptly loses a big battle to the Spartan admiral Lysander. And Athenians are not supposed to lose naval battles. Alcibiades then flees and withdraws to who knows where. Sparta starts getting even more support from Persia. Persia's like, excellent, this is good. Athens is losing. Their navy gets even stronger and stronger and stronger. Nonetheless, even with this, going back and forth, right? The next year, there's another big battle. And Athens wins this one. Argensunae, right? After this battle, the Spartans actually sue for peace. Once again, they say, Athens, you can, keep the status quo, peace, end of the war, you've won. Athens says, no, we want more. So, this major victory is going to be marred by an event that gets called the execution of the generals, which is going to provoke, again, this crisis of democracy.
What do you mean by execution?
What's that?
What do you mean by the execution of the
What do I mean by the execution of the generals? So, you remember there are 10 Athenian generals selected every year. After this big battle, right, the generals, the 8 generals that were kind of commanding the big fleet, right, wanted to sail off and pursue the Spartans to kind of mop up and wipe out kind of the remaining Spartan forces. They sent a contingent of Athenian ships to stay kind of where they were, to rescue the survivors, right, from like sunken ships, and to collect the bodies of the dead that they could still, the dead Athenian sailors that they could still recover. Then the generals sail off to go fight the Spartans. However, a big storm arises, and this relief contingent can't rescue the sailors who are in the water and can't recover the bodies. Fearing what's going to happen, they sail to Athens and basically throw the generals under the bus, saying, look, the generals failed to fulfill this important duty, right? Rescuing the soldiers, collecting the bodies. this is in fact an act of treason against Athens. Why is it treason against Athens? Well, because it hurt Athens. Long story short. So, the Athenian assembly is really upset. They then send a message to the generals saying you have to come back and stand trial for treason. Long story short, basically one general's going to flee. The ones who come back, stand trial, are convicted, and are executed for treason after winning this big victory because of the storm. At which point, the next day, the Athenian people are going to have a huge, they're going to flip out. Oh my God, what do? We just killed all of our generals, kind of in the heat of anger. So the first thing they do is they convict the person who had basically put the generals on trial. When that person flees and runs away, then they can basically get really upset. Crisis of democracy, right? They start saying, look, the democracy, we're having some problems here.
Why did the Athenians deny the peace the first time?
They want it more.
Oh, like land?
Everything. Wanted to, more power, more land, just wanted to defeat Sparta. So, next year, fighting continues, there's going to be a big battle. They just fought it. As the ships are lining up, getting organized, ready to fight, another ship comes racing in over the horizon. Who is it? Alcibiades sails up to the Athenian fleet from parts unknown, saying, look, I can help win this battle. Put me in charge. But nothing comes of it. Either doesn't care, doesn't want to, right? This ends up being a crushing defeat for Athens, right? The reason it's a crushing defeat, not only does it hurt their navy, but where the location of the battle is, up here, it effectively cuts off Athenian access to the Black Sea, which is where most of their grain is coming from. So Athens no longer has a food supply, and the next year are forced to surrender. So Athens loses the Peloponnesian War, although really no one wins. Okay, so what I want you to remember from this, the big thing though, right, is one of the things that Athens is experiencing is a crisis of democracy. There are lots of people who are unsure about the democracy's kind of abilities, efficacy, right? Sicilian expedition, execution of the generals. There's a lot of voices saying, maybe Athens needs an oligarchy. Abdul.
They didn't Alcibiades after that he fled to Persia, right?
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah.
got assassinated by Sparta.
So lots of fleeing, yeah. Lots of people fleeing to Persia, right? Persia was a popular place to flee to. All right, so our last reading for today is a really interesting text called the Constitution of the Athenians, right? Again, Constitution, a word just meaning kind of the state organization of Athens, right? Or how the Athenian government works, right? And this was written by an author, we don't know who it is. We call the author Pseudo-Xenophon because in the Middle Ages they thought Xenophon wrote this, but he didn't. Or sometimes we call the author the old oligarch. And it's not entirely accurate as well, too. We don't really know why this was written. Was this person serious? Were they writing it as a joke? Was it a literary exercise? Who knows? But it gives us really kind of interesting insight into the Athenian democracy and possibly this crisis of the democracy that I was talking about at the end of the Peloponnesian War. All right, so the author writes this. He pitches this essay as a response to a common assessment of the Athenian democracy. So what I'd like you to do is to take a look very quickly at the first two paragraphs, right? In chapter 1, page 1. And think about what is the common, what do non-Athenians commonly think about the Athenian democracy, right? And what is his response to this assessment? right, so according to the author, what do most Athenian, or most non-Athenians, what do they think about the Athenian democracy as a type of government? Jordan?
They think it's weird that power is so like evenly distributed
Okay.
to like classes.
Okay, it's certainly weird. There's something more to it than just being weird.
I'll just state the last part of the first paragraph. It says, which are looked upon as blunders by the rest of the Hellenic world, are the reverse.
Right, so what does that mean? So what do most of the non-Athenians, what do they think about the democracy?
It puts like the general population over the rich.
Well, I mean, that's just, I mean, maybe not true, but that's part of it. No, but what is the last sentence you read says something different. Right, it's that last sentence in the first paragraph that's really important. Jordan?
It says it's a blunder, like it's a mistake.
No, not that. Yeah, Mark, what do you have?
I think it says that it is the poor that should have privilege because they are the one who forms the state. They're the one who created the atmosphere they have. They are the one the soldiers that go to war and that makes the Athens greater than.
True. But it's not, I mean, again, that's not quite the assessment point here. All right, first off, does the author like the democracy? What? You think he does?
These are supposed to show that they set about its preservation in the right way, that those other transactional connected, which are looked upon as blended by the rest of the Hellenic world, are the reverse. So I think he's saying like anybody who thinks democracy is not good, it's like reverse to the rest of the Hellenic world.
All right, you're close. Does he like it? Clay?
I think that he judges it a lot, that he necessarily does not like it. Thinks that there's an unfair power grab between the wealthy and the poor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that speaks a lot into it. I think, if you want my honest opinion, I see a lot of Karl Marx in this writing of like, that there's a lot of unfairness between power of the social classes.
Okay. So, he says, as concerning the constitution of the Athenians and the type or the manner of the constitution which they have chosen. What is the type of constitution the Athenians have chosen? Democracy. I praise it not, insofar as the very choice involves the welfare of the baser folk as opposed to that of the better class. I repeat, I withhold my praise so far. I'm going to stop there for a second. Does he like the democracy? No. He does not like it himself, right? As a form of government. Why?
Because they oppose the welfare of the basic folk with the better class.
Right. It caters to the poorer people, right? Instead of the aristocrats, instead of the better people, right? Now, most critics of Athens would say the same thing. So that's not really the assessment that he is challenging, right? But then he goes on. But given the fact that it is, right, the democracy exists, I propose to show that they set about its preservation in the right way, and that those other transactions in connection with it, which are looked upon as blunders by the rest of the Hellenic world, are the reverse. So he doesn't like democracy, but
He's saying since that's what they chose, they want to lie with prejudice.
right. And what does going about it the right way mean? Doing right. What's that?
Like they cater to the masses instead
Right.
of the smaller.
Which is not a good thing, according to him, right? So this is not a good thing. But he's like, they are effective. What's the common assessment about the democracy, do you think then? What do people believe about it as a form of government?
That it's ineffective.
That it's ineffective, that it doesn't work well. And he says, no, I don't like it, but in fact, it works very well at doing what it's supposed to do. What is it supposed to do?
Cater to the masses.
Cater to the masses, or to protect itself, right? So again, he's like, even though, because he'll go on, like, catering to the masses, gotta wrap this up soon, right, is not a good thing. He's like, look, it leads to bad results. It leads to things like the Sicilian expedition, another stuff, he doesn't say that, but it leads to stuff like this. It leads to bad decision making. But he's like, that's not a bug, that's a feature. Because the way the democracy is set up, that only allows it to become more powerful because it can blame someone else, you know, throw them under the bus, and then the democracy comes out looking even better than before. So he's like, all of these things that look like bad decision making or ineffectiveness, he's like, are really examples of the democracy doing what it's supposed to do. So he's like, everyone thinks it's ineffective. In fact, it's really, you know, kind of good at its job. It's just its job is a bad thing. All right, Brian.
Sorry, and on top of that, it's expected. It's like how certain kings behave for democracy to begin with, especially as mentioned before. It's meant to to serve the will of the people. Given choices, it's very much mentioned in paragraph 2 where it says the steersman, the boatswain, the manman, the man at the prow of the shipwright. These are the ones who invent the sea with power rather than a heavy company and manner for all.
So he's connected, this is what he's connected. So he's like, it makes sense that Athens has adopted this form of government, given, you know, all of this stuff. He's like, I don't like it, but there's a logic behind it. I don't agree with the results, but you can't fault the logic, right? As opposed to everyone else who's like, well, it's just chaotic mess. He's like, no, right? It is about preserving this power. Problematic power, he would say, but it's good at preserving this power, right? And so we're out of time now.